And back on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot and Ashley Bastock in Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine. We heard from Andrew Berry today at the Convention Center. So let's kind of throw out some takeaways. Mary Kay, what was your big takeaway from listening to Andrew today?
Well, I think one of the things that I did write about was the fact that, it is on the table or could be on the table that, you might have to do something with Deshaun's big contract. Now, he's got $230 million guaranteed, so it doesn't matter if they have to move some commas around or move some things out to another year or give him, some upfront signing bonus money or whatever they need to do to lower their cap number, because right now they're 13 point something over the cap. They will save a bunch of money when they release John Johnson III. With the June 1st designation, they will save 9.75 on the cap with him. But that's not enough. I mean, that doesn't even get them to ground zero. I mean, they have a lot more that they have to do, and you're going to look at the double-digit contracts. And, of course, the biggest one of all is Deshaun Watson at almost a $55 million cap hit. So if they can get some relief there, they would really like to be able to do it. But, I mean, it doesn't mean that's a foregone conclusion. They've got a number of guys in that category. They don't have to do Deshaun. Maybe they do Deshaun another year. But they've got other guys that they can kind of mess around with those numbers a little bit, and they're going to have to. Either that or they're going to have to either trade or release more players.
Ashley, what did you have as a takeaway from this thing?
So I think my takeaway is going to be something I'm writing about, which is this defensive line, the defensive front, defensive tackle situation. And I think I'm still kind of unsure how this team is going to handle defensive tackles, and that is making me a little bit nervous. Now, again, the caveat is Andrew likes to keep things close to the vest, but I think it's interesting to kind of hear him talk about, when we talked to him before they hired Jim Schwartz and people asked about the defensive tackles, he said, well, it kind of depends on what guy we hire, what the front of this defense is going to look like. But I think this is a phrase we're going to hear again and again with Jim Schwartz, is this attack-minded style of defense. And they just didn't really have that last year up front. Myles Garrett had 16 sacks. The next highest sack getter was Taven Bryan with 2. So that's not going to cut it. That's not exactly, I think, attack-minded for your defensive line. But you guys know I tried to ask Andrew, well, you haven't spent a lot of money on free agents the last couple of years. You haven't drafted high. And he kind of bristled at this idea that it hasn't been an investment. And I think they've invested in their ends, obviously, right? But the defensive tackle spot, there hasn't been that big swing. And he said, we've kind of patched it together with these other, it's kind of essentially been the quantity of guys they've gotten. And I worried that they might stick to that same strategy, and I'm not convinced it's going to work.
Yeah, Mary Kay, I would certainly push back on at least the defensive tackle side of things. They really have sort of cobbled that together. And he pointed to Sheldon Richardson, but I mean, they cut Sheldon Richardson because he was making too much money. So I don't know. I mean, we remember the Maliks. This last year, they go and get Taven Bryan. They try to kind of reclaim his career. They hand it to the rookies. There hasn't really been that big investment. And I do wonder, if they are going to go out and pursue a Jesse Bates, for as much as we just talked about how they're going to free up the money they need, if they do go pursue a Jesse Bates, that does take a chunk out of what they could use to maybe pursue a top-end defensive tackle at least.
Yes, but remember this, and this is an important thing to remember. When you acquire or sign a guy, you can mess around with his contract so that you are lowering his cap number down to almost nothing, like they did with Amari Cooper last year, right? I mean, they traded for Amari Cooper. He had an over $20 million a year cap hit, and they got that thing down to one something, I think. So they can do that with these guys. Of course, you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit, and you're pushing some things out. But if you kind of keep the shell game going, you can keep doing this and get what you need and you want each year. So I still don't think it's going to be a problem. I think if they want to go out and sign a top-notch safety and a top-notch defensive tackle, they'll be able to do it.
Okay, so my takeaway we'll talk about, and again, this is something that'll be a topic as we move forward here in the offseason. Let's talk a little Greg Newsome. It was one of the questions we threw out in our pod on Friday. What questions do we have for Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski? So Andrew said about Greg that he feels good about where Greg is. He's going to be a pretty big part of what we're doing moving forward. I think Greg, one of his value adds is the fact that he can play outside and inside. But we think he's a good young player, and I know Jim Schwartz is excited to work with him. Mary Kay, your headline on cleveland.com.